Welcome. Hi, I'm the beginning of a new series. Welcome especially for those who come for the second or third series. When was it you started coming, Liko? Was it 2 years ago?
2 years ago.
Yeah, good. Welcome. Okay, so we're going to be starting at the beginning again. We normally do in September. And so what we're studying is something called the principle, the divine principle, unification principle, which is kind of a revelation, I guess, and a philosophy and a way of life. And it was articulated and expressed by someone called Samya Moon, who comes from Korea. Started off in the as encounter with spiritual encounter with God when Jesus, I guess about a long time ago, sometime in the mid-30s, yeah. Anyway, this first part, it starts to look at the principles upon which you would say the universe is based, upon which human life is based. And is anybody, I mean, I'm just assuming, do people here believe in God or not? Or where are we coming from?
I don't believe in God.
You don't believe in God? Okay. And I'm just, is it help? You do? All right. Okay, well, it's one does and one doesn't. Well, and the rest are not sure, I guess. Okay, that's fine. Anyway, so I wasn't particularly going to look at discussing whether God exists or not. A lot of it depends upon what people mean by the word God. Because the word God is not like a word glass or table. It's it's just anyway. It's a sort of word, I suppose, that people use to describe some sense of ultimate reality or some sense of numinousness. Some people sometimes they feel there's some kind of presence, which is what they might label God, or they might say, well, God is the being which created the universe. It's very hard to describe God. And so I guess that really brings us into the first part of this, to try to have a look and see where we get to. Is it going to work? Yes. Anyway, so if God exists, the question is, if God exists, is it possible to know what God is like? So lots of people say, well, first of all, a lot of people say God doesn't exist. And then sometimes people say, well, God might exist, but even if he exists or doesn't exist, we can never know one way or the other, sort of agnostics. And then some people say, well, yes, I believe that God exists, but it's impossible to know what God is like. And so all kinds of questions, and people have been studying this for thousands of years, and philosophy and theology to try to understand, try to prove the existence or non-existence of God, and also try and figure out, if God does exist, what is God like? And I suppose the problem is, if God exists, is it possible to see God? I'm a school teacher, and sometimes children say to me, I believe in God if you can show me God. Yes? But do things that exist, do only things we can see exist, or are there some things that exist that we cannot see? Lots of things we can't see. All we can see is everything within a particular part of the spectrum. But lots of things we can't see. With our eyes, we can't see infrared. With our eyes, we can't see ultraviolet. With our eyes, we can't see X-rays. With our eyes, there's lots of things we cannot see because our eyes cannot detect them. For example, in terms of hearing, there are lots of things which we can detect, but lots of things we can't detect, like dog whistles, or these whistles. Sometimes they play outside some places to drive teenagers away. Have you heard of those?
Yeah.
Yeah, adults can't hear them. Only teenagers can hear this frequency, so some adults think that's brilliant. But just because we can't hear it doesn't mean it's not there. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not there. It's to do with smell, all sorts of things. Our senses are only able to pick up a certain part of the world in which we live. But there's huge areas of life and of the world that we are unaware of. And so that's why sometimes people look at things through telescopes or through microscopes. But even then, there's a limitation to what it is we can detect. And so lots of people didn't believe in X-rays until one day it so happened that, I can't remember who it was, Wantigen I think, discovered them because his, the film plate he had picked up these sources. Oh, that's how they picked, I think Madame Curie, I think it was, discovered the nature of radiation because it affected the plate, but nothing else is able to detect it. And so that's a problem with God as well. How do you detect God? Is there a God detector? Like a sort of, you go around detecting radiation with a little Geiger counter. Is there something we can use to detect whether God exists or not, or whether God is present or not? Is there? So, lots of things we can't detect, but doesn't mean that they're not there. And so we need to, just as in order to try and find out evidence for the existence of X-rays or radiation, scientists do all kinds of experiments. Do you think it's possible to conceive of an experiment which can prove the existence or non-existence of God?
I don't know if you could prove it.
Sorry?
I don't know if you could prove it, but you could probably make some kind of a theory.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how would that theory be proven or disproven?
Probably, you'd have to see if it fits, if it explains what happens, or...
Right.
The experiment is your life.
Yeah.
And things
Yeah.
happen to you.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, as Martin was saying, a good theory, you develop a theory which tries to explain all the facts, and also a good theory is able to predict, okay, this will happen. And so Einstein's theory of relativity, it was an extraordinary theory. A lot of people didn't believe it was true. I had to try and prove it, because Einstein's theory predicted that light would be bent. And people said, that's impossible to bend light. And so, Eddington went off to the south, somewhere in the southern hemisphere, and was able to show that light was being bent by the gravity of a particular star, I guess. I can't remember now. So again, think about an experiment to prove the existence or non-existence of God. So we need to come up with a theory and then see whether this theory works. Anyway, so the question is, can we know what God is like? Where can we find, if we can know what God is like, where can we find out about God? So let's just have a hypothesis that God exists, and let's see if we can develop a theory upon that, and let's see if we can support that theory, whether this theory makes sense. Whether it's possible to explain the nature of reality without God, or do we need to postulate the existence of God to be able to explain the nature of the world in which we live, and explain about human beings, and explain about human history and human culture? There's certain things where we can detect the fingerprints of God. There's no other way of explaining a pattern. When a scientist finds a pattern, they try to explain, why is this pattern here? What law is there behind it? So if we can find a pattern which can suggest, well, this pattern suggests maybe the existence of some kind of God. We can't explain it otherwise. So where can we find out about God? Well, as I said, you can't see God. So one way people often use is the method of analogy. Now, who was this painting done by? See, who's the culture vulture here?
Degas?
No,
Renoir.
not Degas. Renoir, well done.
Renoir, yeah.
That's what comes with age. He's not a contemporary of yours, was he? Anyway, so Renoir painted this painting. Renoir now has died. Supposing you wanted to find out about Renoir, what could you do? Well, you could go to France, you could look him up in the telephone directory, but you find somebody else who's got his number now. He's not alive anymore. So how else can you find out about what Renoir was like? One way is by finding out seeing if you can find his correspondence, letters he might have written to other people, diaries he might have kept. And through reading his letters and reading his diaries, you can catch something of his character and his together. Yeah, are they or aren't they?
Yes.
Anybody else? Yes, and positive and negative are attracted to each other. So you can see that's the nature of the world in which we live, these dual characteristics which are complementary, different but complementary and mutually attractive, and are necessary for there to be existence. I said if they were just male, then we know the species would die out, or if the species just female, it would die out. Without this complementary pairs, things cannot exist. And if you're interested in science, if you go even deeper, you can see that all particles are either bosons or fermions. And bosons are made up of quarks, and when you look at quarks, they also exist in pairs. There's three, anyways, this is the standard model of particle physics, either up and down, or charm and strange, and top and bottom. These quarks also exist in this kind of symmetry. And leptons also, again, they exist in pairs. Electron, neutrino, and electron, muon, neutrino, muon, tau, neutrino, tau. And so finally there's also matter and antimatter. So, this idea of there being symmetry is a very important idea within science. And so wherever we look, we can see this. For example, inside and out. Is it possible to have an inside without an outside? Can you imagine? You can't imagine it, can you? Is it possible to have a front without a back? No. A high without low. Convex without concave. There are certain things, that's just the way the nature of reality exists in these dual characteristics. You can't have one without the other. And so everything then exists in relationships. So even though an atom may be a positive or negative ion, it still consists of protons and electrons in stable unity. And in people, a feminine nature is found latent in man, and a masculine nature is found latent in women. So that's just the nature of the world in which we live. It's like this. And so we have this idea in Genesis that God created man in his image, male and female, he created them. So this suggests that the image of God, if God created the universe, and the universe has this running all the way from one level to from the lowest to the highest level, the universe has these complementary pairs, these dual characteristics. This suggests that God himself also is a being in which has these dual characteristics. So if everything in the universe has masculine and feminine aspects, the ultimate cause or creator of the universe must also possess the dual characteristics of masculinity and femininity. And within God, these are harmonized into oneness. Yes?
So as in the universe, as an effect, the continuity of existence is because of masculinity and femininity. Could you say for God as a cause, the continuity of God as an infinite being is because of this relationship between masculine and feminine?
Yes, within God it's not that they're separated. Within God it's all just oneness, but within God there's like this conversation going on.
Yeah.
There's this give and take going on within God, a conversation, dialogue. These are complementary, but also they're harmonized into oneness. Not like they are in the world in which we live, where often there's a difficult to get harmony. But within God, yes, they're like that. And so this is like the sort of give and take within God takes place like that. And when there's no give and take, there's death. Yeah. If you're alive, it's often because you're thinking inside. You're having an internal conversation or dialogue. So yeah, that's the nature of God. So how is this different? Well, as I said, European culture is characterized by a dualism which runs through the whole of European philosophy, literature, language. So this is Pythagoras' table of opposites. So what was Pythagoras more famous for?
Theorem.
His theorem. Do you remember what the theorem was?
Theorem.
What was it?
The square and the hypotenuse
Equals?
the sum of the squares on the other two sides.
Well done. You're well trained. Good. That's right. Anyway, so Pythagoras was not just interested in geometry. He was basically also a religious leader. And he thought he could describe the nature of God through mathematics and through numbers. And so, that's what he was into. His philosophy, his religion and everything. But anyway, he came up with this table of opposites. Limit, unlimited. Odd, even, one, many. Right, left. Male, female. Resting, moving. Straight, curved. Light, darkness. Good, bad, and square and oblong. So what do you notice about that table of opposites compared to the other table which we looked at before, dual characteristics?
Well, the last one.
The
Second
last,
one.
good and bad, okay. So what's the...
They don't exist in harmony, or they can't.
Okay. So yeah, the table of opposites, not the table of complements, the table of opposites. And here you have good and bad. Okay. So what are the implications of having good and bad in that table of opposites?
There's a moral.
Hmm?
There's a moral implication.
What is it?
Well, that one thing is acceptable and beneficial, and one thing is destructive and not beneficial.
Okay.
They both belong in this world. Or not belong, but God created them both.
Well, anyway, Pythagoras says that good and bad are woven into the fabric of the universe. In other words, that
Complementary, they need each other to exist.
yes, and so sometimes people say you can't have good without evil, yeah? And that's because comes all the way through this, which has gone through our whole culture. But it also means the idea here is that good and evil are woven into the fabric of the way the world is, the way the universe is. You can't have good without evil because the fabric of the universe contains both. Yeah. What else does it mean, having those good and evil there?
God is both good and evil.
God is good and evil? Yeah, okay.
If He created the world.
If God created the world, and God created the world with good and evil in it, that means God himself is the source and the origin of good and evil, yeah?
It means that all the ones on the A side must be in some way related to good,
Yes.
and all the ones on the B side must be in some way related to evil.
Yes, exactly. And so this is the dominant idea within European culture, that limit, odd, one, right, male, resting, straight, light, good and square, these are all good. And unlimited, even, many, left, female, moving, curved, darkness, bad, oblong are all bad.
That's why you have weird ideas about the left-handed people.
That's right. Yes, that's exactly where it is exactly where it comes from. And up until very recent, exactly. Yeah. Yes, and so the word left in one language, I can't remember, is sinister, which has these two meanings. Yeah, because you get this idea that, and that's why up until very recently, left-handed people were forced to use their right hand. And then, yes, and so you get all these sorts of ideas. Also, the female is evil. So again, the whole of European culture has looked down upon femininity. And for example, also in the left-hand column comes mind, and the right-hand column comes body. And so men were associated with mind, and women with body. And so that's why until very recently, it's only the men that received an education. So this table of opposites is permeated the whole of European culture and literature and language and our way of thinking, such that people aren't even aware of it. Yeah.
Wouldn't even be associated with balance and goodness though? So shouldn't even and odd? Because usually odd is associated with imbalance. Even with balance. So I'm surprised they're in that column.
I'm trying to remember why that is like that. Have I got it written down here? I can't remember that one. But you get this idea of one and many. So what are the implications of one being good and many being bad?
Unity and disunity.
Diversity
Yes.
is frowned upon.
Diversity and pluralism is frowned upon, and the European goal and European culture is this desire to achieve oneness. The removal of difference, the removal of diversity, and the political implications of this are, obviously, this is the whole thing behind the European project. Yeah, single currency, single government, single law, everything one, because difference is regarded as being bad. Yeah? You get this very much on the continent. And, you get straight is good, and that's why, what happened to the curved cucumbers? Never mind, it doesn't come from there at all. There's another reason for that. And, so limit is to do with order, unlimited is to do with disorder. And the importance, hi Margaret, imposing order, and all sorts of things. Anyway,
May I just say something?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
This Pythagoras,
Uh-huh.
of course, was a great man,
Mm-hmm.
and he influenced Western culture, but he's not the rock.
No.
I wouldn't say he's the rock upon which Western culture is built.
Right. I agree with you completely. Because he didn't come up with this idea.
No.
All he was doing was articulating and putting down into writing the dominant way of thinking of his world.
The Greek world.
Yes, and if he'd come up with this by himself, everybody disagreed with it, it would have sunk without a trace. The reason why it continued is because he was just articulating what other people thought. And to get this idea also of resting and moving. Resting is regarded as being good, and moving is regarded as being bad. So what are the implications of that? The ideal is what? Static, stasis. So what do people often say about perfection or heaven? It would be very what?
Boring.
Boring. Why?
Well, because it would be a state of stasis.
Yes, nothing's changing. There's nothing new. Everything is at rest. So these, as I said, these ideas are written into our language and our sayings and our way of thinking in a way often we're just not aware of, this sort of idea. And, why is this important? Well, coming back to the significance of Pythagoras, Bertrand Russell said, "I do not know of any other man who's been as influential as Pythagoras was in the sphere of thought. The whole conception of the eternal world is derived from him." So, I said he wrote this down, but he was articulating and writing down what was the dominant way of thinking in Greece, and this became the dominant way of thinking in the whole of European culture. And this is, and I said, this is Hayek, who was an economist and various other things. It's not merely the knowledge of earlier generations is communicated to us through the medium of language. The structure of the language itself implies certain views about the nature of the world. By learning a particular language, we acquire a certain picture of the world, a framework for thinking within which we therefore henceforth move without even being aware of it. So all these ideas, they're embedded into the grammar of our language, and we don't even think about it. So I said all languages in Europe, they all have a saying, you can't have good without evil. But people don't think about it and examine, is that true? It's just an accepted assumption about the nature of reality. And as I said, it's embedded in our language, the structure of our language. So, what are the implications of this? Well, this is, have you come across Derrida? No, he was oh yes, what was he then? No idea. You're going to study in this year, all right. Anyway, he's a French postmodernist. And postmodernist, one of the things the postmodernist project has been to try to uncover the assumptions at the root and the basis of European culture. And so Western thought, said Derrida, has always been structured in terms of dichotomies or polarities, good versus evil, being versus nothingness, presence versus absence, truth versus error, identity versus difference, mind versus matter, man versus woman, soul versus body, life versus death, nature versus culture, speech versus writing. So this polarity of opposites, which Pythagoras identified, is just gone through the whole of European culture. People only started to recognize this and the implications of this very recently, which is the part of the postmodernist project. And again, a postmodernist statement, the whole reductionist enterprise in Western philosophy may be seen as the conquest of B by a transcendent A. So let's go back to that, A and B. The conquest of B by a transcendent A. So the whole of European philosophy and history and culture has been A trying to eliminate B. Yeah? That's just the philosophical implications of this. One is good, one is bad.